I was standing on a stage in front of 300 people, under a spotlight that was genuinely the brightest light I have ever been near in my life, and my legs were turning orange. Not tan, not bronze, orange. The kind of orange that has no business being on a human body. The kind of orange that belongs on a traffic cone or a construction site. And I still had 4 more poses to get through. Let me tell you exactly how I ended up there, because the story of how I walked onto that stage is so much worse than anything that happened on it. It started 8 months earlier, on a Sunday morning, when I was sitting on my couch watching a bodybuilding competition on television, the kind with the loud music and the dramatic lighting, and I made a decision I had absolutely no business making. I decided I was going to enter one. Not next year, not after I lost some weight, but the one coming up in 8 months, which I had found on a registration website before the thought had even fully formed. I paid the entry fee before I put my phone down. I want you to remember that it was a Sunday morning, which means I had not yet had coffee, which I think explains a lot. Now here is the thing you need to understand about me at that moment. I was not, by any stretch of the word, a bodybuilder. I went to the gym about twice a week. I occasionally lifted things heavier than my bag, and I owned one protein powder that had been sitting in my kitchen since a period of motivation 6 months earlier that lasted approximately 9 days. I had the general shape of someone who knows what a gym looks like. That was it. That was my competitive foundation. Tell me honestly in the comments. If you woke up on a Sunday morning and impulsively registered for a bodybuilding competition you had zero business entering, would you have backed out the next morning when the caffeine wore off, or would you have committed to the bit the way I did and spent 8 months genuinely preparing for something you had no business preparing for? The training part 1 will summarize quickly because this video is not about discipline. It is about what happens when discipline goes sideways in the most public setting possible. I hired a coach. I changed my diet in ways that I will not fully describe here because the details are genuinely upsetting. But I will say this. There is a version of a meal plan that makes you question every life decision you have ever made while eating plain chicken out of a container in a parking lot because you forgot to eat at the correct time window. I lived that version for about 5 months. I trained 6 days a week. I turned down birthday cake at 4 separate occasions, which I want acknowledged as a sacrifice of the highest order. I lost weight, then gained it back as something visibly different, then did that again. By month 6 I looked, for the first time in my adult life, like someone who had been inside a gym for reasons other than social obligation. My arms looked different, my posture looked different, my relationship with carbohydrates looked different, mostly because it had been severely restricted. I was genuinely proud of what I had built, and then I met the spray tan. If you have never been involved in competitive bodybuilding, let me explain something. Competition tan is not a normal tan. It is not a spray tan you get before a holiday. It is a product so dark and so aggressively pigmented that it exists for one specific purpose, which is to make muscle definition visible under the bleaching intensity of stage lighting. You apply it the night before, let it set, apply it again the morning of, and by the time you walk on stage you look like a different species. This is normal. Every single competitor does it. The entire stage looks like a painting by the time the lights hit. The problem was not the product. The product was fine. The problem was that I applied it myself. My coach had told me, specifically, to have someone else apply the tan, or to go to the official competition tanning station the night before. I heard that instruction. I processed that instruction. And then, at 9 p.m. the night before the competition, standing in my bathroom alone, I decided I could probably do it myself and save the $50 tanning station fee, which is an economy that cost me everything. This is the moment where it goes wrong, and I want you to fully picture what happened next. The tan comes in a bottle that looks completely normal. You apply it with a mitt, working section by section, making sure coverage is even. What the instructions do not adequately communicate is that at 9 p.m. in a bathroom with warm white lighting, the product looks absolutely fine. It looks like a normal deep tan. It looks even, controlled, and professional. This is a lie your lighting is telling you. What it actually looks like under cold stage lighting, or really any light that isn't specifically designed to obscure its flaws, is a completely different thing. I went to bed satisfied. I woke up the next morning, walked into my bathroom, turned on the light, and met a version of myself I had never seen before and hoped to never see again. There were streaks across my shoulders where I had gone over the same patch too many times. There was a patch on my left calf that was at least 2 shades darker than everything around it. And my hands, which I had used to blend the product on various areas instead of exclusively using the mitt, were a completely different color from my forearms, so it looked like I was wearing a pair of dark gloves made of my own skin. I called my coach. He said, and I am quoting this exactly, "How did you manage that?" Not a question, a statement of disbelief. He told me to go to the tanning station at the venue when it opened at 7 a.m. and see if they could fix it. I drove to the venue looking like a man who had lost a bet with a paint factory. The tanning station team at the venue were professionals who had clearly seen everything before, but I watched two of them exchange a look when I walked in that communicated something they were too polite to say out loud. They worked on me for 40 minutes, which is 20 minutes longer than any other competitor I saw go through that chair. By the end, I was more even, but I was also significantly darker than I had planned to be, because the only way to fix uneven application at that stage is to bring everything up to match the darkest patch, which in my case was a very committed orange. Here is the second thing that went wrong. And this one is not my fault, which is important to me that you know. The competition was organized by age category and weight class, and I had registered for the correct division based on my stats at registration 8 months earlier. What I had not accounted for was that 8 months of serious training would move me out of that weight class entirely by competition day. I was now heavier, significantly leaner, and technically in the wrong division. I found this out at the weigh-in, 2 hours before the competition started, standing on a scale in a room full of other orange people. Ugh. When the official looked at my number, looked at my registration, and told me I'd need to compete in the next weight class up instead. The next weight class up included people who had been doing this for 5 to 10 years. I want you to sit with that for a moment. So here is where I am by the time I walk backstage before my category. I am the wrong shade of orange. I am competing against people who have been doing this for 5 to 10 years. I have been awake since 5 in the morning running on a diet that had not included a full meal in 4 days for water cut purposes, which is its own kind of fun. The backstage area of a bodybuilding competition, for reference, is one of the more surreal places a normal person can find themselves on a Saturday afternoon. Everyone around me looked extraordinary. Everyone was pumping up with resistance bands and small dumbbells to get blood into their muscles before going on stage, which is a real thing that happens. There was a woman nearby doing lat pull-downs with a resistance band attached to a door frame, fully focused, fully composed, looking like she had done this 40 times before. I was standing next to her eating a rice cake and hoping nobody asked me how long I had been competing, because the honest answer was 8 months and I was terrified that it showed. I went on stage anyway. Of course I did. 8 months of work, an entry fee, and a Sunday morning worth of impulsive confidence is not something you walk away from because the odds are bad. I did my 4 mandatory poses. I held each one for exactly as long as I had practiced, which in the cold light of an actual stage felt about twice as long as it ever had in my living room. I did my individual routine, which I had choreographed myself to a song that felt extremely powerful during rehearsals and sounded slightly absurd bouncing off the walls of an actual competition stage in front of 300 people who were watching in near total silence. I looked less like a competitive bodybuilder and more like a sweet potato that had been to the gym. I held the pose anyway. I had not trained for 8 months to break character over a color. I did not place. I came last in my category, which was a category I was not supposed to be in, which means I came last in a category full of people who had more experience, more preparation. Someone in the audience coughed during what was supposed to be the most dramatic beat of my music. I heard it clearly. I carried on. At one point during my transition between poses, I caught my own reflection in the mirrored back panel of the stage and saw the orange. And I understood for the first time what those 2 tanning station professionals had been looking at each other about. From where I was standing, under those lights, and a better relationship with a spray tan bottle than I had managed to build in one night. Here is the actual insight that came out of all of this. And it is not the one I expected. The competitor who came first in my category shook my hand after the results and asked how long I had been competing. When I told him this was my first show, and I had registered 8 months ago on a Sunday morning having never trained seriously before that, and somewhere between driving home that night, still partially orange despite 2 showers, and eating the first full meal I had allowed myself in 4 days, I realized the Sunday morning version of me who impulsively clicked register was not wrong. He was just slightly early. So here is what I want to know from you. If you had trained for 8 months, driven to a venue looking like a traffic cone, Found out you'd been placed in the wrong weight category 2 hours before you went on stage. He laughed for a long time, and then said that was one of the better origin stories he'd heard. He'd been competing for 7 years. He started, he said, by losing badly at his first show, and coming back the next year anyway. I looked down at my orange hands, then at the stage I had just walked off, then back at him, and decided I probably would too. And then gone out and done your routine anyway in front of 300 people. Would you have called that a failure, or would you have called it the best story you've ever had? Because I've told this one at least 20 times since it happened, and it gets a better reaction every single time than any trophy I could have brought home. Tell me in the comments, because genuinely I want to know. If you like stories like this, the kind that sound like they should be embarrassing but somehow aren't once enough time passes, subscribe, because this channel is nothing but these, and there are a lot more of them coming.